So Anujna Dnyaneshwar is an architect practicing earthen building in India. She and her husband started this initiative, which they have called MAATIMOL, which means worth dust. At MAATIMOL, they aspire to create carefully designed earthen buildings that are relevant with the modern lifestyle and responsible in their consumption. They use local natural materials with techniques that are ancient, but designs that are contemporary. Most of her clients are, although families with urban backgrounds, they are by choice moving into smaller, often off grid homes in villages or wilderness. In other words, people are willingly stepping down the ladder of increasing consumption. I was introduced to Anujna by Aarti, who's also here with us today, Aarti Kirloskar. And I went to visit one of her sites in Bhor. But I'm really looking forward. So Anujna has been working with mud and clay now for several years. She also trained with Didi Contractor, if I'm not wrong. So Anujna, welcome, and over to you.
Yes, thank you. I will just share the screen. Actually, is it possible to share it from your end?
I do. I have it open.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So that's the last one, I guess.
That's the last one. Is that the first one?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks. So when we were looking at this clay sludge, what happened was there were 2-3 different pieces of the puzzle that we had to put together. One was that there is this sludge, and we have to work with whatever scale of purity that it comes in and whatever properties that it has. And at the same time, we had these 2-3 new project sites where we were also trying to work to sort of divert the water away from the foundations and like create some kind of diversion trenches, which you see in this picture. So in flow of those divergent trenches, we were trying to create like small pools and small water bodies. And one of the requirements was to like sort of figure out some kind of a pond liner, which won't be another industrial material introduced. So that there was this requirement where there is a pond liner required, and then there was this clay sludge that Manisha mentioned, where there's a lot of clay coming in, and that clay has to be used somewhere. And at one point, someone had one of our hydrologist friends had mentioned that bentonite clay is bought from India Mart and used as clay bond liners in some places. So we thought that since this is also clay, it's probably possible to use this sludge as a pond liner, and maybe we can make smaller ponds retain more water. And then it sort of also made sense because the reason this clay shouldn't go into water bodies is because that's exactly what it's doing to the rivers and streams and rivulets, right? So it's blocking the movement of the water, which is what we'd want to do if we want a pond liner. So then, but then this process of like figuring out whether this clay sludge can be used for this purpose or not is going to be a little bit of a slow process, because we'll need at least one cycle of seasons to observe how it's going, and maybe more, to really find out what the effects are. And then we'll have to do it on a smaller scale first, and then uh, maybe see if people are interested in doing it on bigger scale. So what you see in the picture is a diversion trench, and behind that is where the foundation of the building is. And where the trench turns around the plot boundary, we have a small pond. And this is like the earliest stage where the trench and the bunds were just made, and it was the first rain and it's still settling. And we were just observing how the land was responding to this intervention, and there was definitely less water going towards the part of the land where the foundation was going to come up. Can we see the next one?
Yeah. Is this the
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the bund is a little more settled. The base of the pond is also a little settled, and we started putting in the smaller stone lines in the trench to make sure the soil from the land doesn't go and deposit in this pond. And we can just go through the pictures slowly. So for us, it took many months to just settle this intervention in the landscape first. And then now we are at a point slowly where the bund has a lot of things growing on it, and that soil is not going to cave in and fall into the pond anymore. And then the next slide, you will see that the bund is covered with a lot of stuff growing on it. Yeah, yeah. And then what happened was that when we went back to the site post monsoon and started clearing up the grass and everything, we realized that we can now slowly start lining the pond. And the first layer of lining is that last slide, which is the stone pitching of the pond. Yeah. So I've tried to take pictures from a couple of angles to see how the stone pitching is going in all directions. So the diversion trench is coming in, and there is this pool of water, and then it will, when it's full, the water body is full, it will also flow down the slope. So at this stage now, I think we are going to add one layer of clay with a lot of straw, and then allow that to sort of get absorbed into the cracks and crevices of the stone, and then keep adding more layers of clay and straw with increasing concentration of the clay and less uh, straw with every layer, and then wait for the monsoon and see how the pond responds to the amount of water that will come into it. And then we will be able to decide whether this works or not. The couple of issues that I foresee with this is that one of the things that was mentioned in when Manisha was talking is that there's a lot of other stuff in it. It's not pure clay, which means that if there are any chemical paints used, or if there is any other uh, non-soluble material that is used, that's going to stay in that ground forever. That is one concern that I see. If there is any organic material like nirmalya or flowers or garlands, I don't see that as a problem, because that will just decompose and merge with the layers of the pond. The third thing that I see is that even if you're thinking on these lines, I don't know how the clay is going to hold on to the pond. If it will, get washed out or not, that I'm still uncertain about. So right now the plan is to just line the pond this year before the monsoon with like couple of layers of clay, and just observe. And then based on what we see, we will decide whether the composition of this lining should be changed or made more concentrated, or just like we'll add more layers to it. We will figure that out, I think, post monsoon. So that's where this experiment is at this stage.
Wonderful, Anujna. It's really exciting to see, and I do understand that these things take time. Few questions that occur to me. One is that you must have studied pond liners, other kind of soils or clays that have been used for pond liners elsewhere. Have you? Yeah. Like for example, when they do desilting of lakes, right? That's often the government is called in to desilt a lake because the lake is kind of building up and then there's not enough the water. So that material and this material, how would it compare? That's my first question. And the second is, can you explain to us a little bit what you see the role of the straw in this?
So the desilted material that I've seen taken out from Khadakwasla Dam and all of those places had a lot of clay, but it also had a lot of silt, silt. So I don't think the silt will function as something that goes and clogs the pores and seals off the percolation of water and function as a pond liner. But since this clay is just clay, it should ideally go into like smaller cracks and crevices of the surface of the pond and stop the movement of the water, which is the exact same behavior that clay has. That's exactly why we don't want it in the water bodies, where we want the water to move. So that's one difference that I can see. The straw should ideally hold the clay together and not like let it just wash away. That's what I'm hoping straw will do. That until it has the opportunity to uh, slowly percolate into the gaps and crevices, we don't want the water to wash out the clay. So I'm hoping the straw will arrest that movement.
So in a sense, you're hoping that by the use of this clay, you will avoid any kind of plastic liner or any kind of cement and concrete, right?
Yes, yes, that's the point.
And the other point that came to my mind is actually, yes, there may be chemical paints and stuff like that, but the proportion of that in comparison with because the bulk of the murti is actually just the clay and then you just have a thin layer. So agreed that yes, we maybe should not put it back into the soil, but proportionally it's quite minimal as compared to the bulk of the clay.
Yes, and we shouldn't put that chemical paint anywhere, not in water bodies also.
Yes, yes.
So, yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
So
If
basically,
it works out, sorry.
sorry. So basically, you've taken a property which we want to avoid in the river Visarjan and flipped it on its head and made it actually work for you, right? That's what you've done. I mean, we don't want the rivers to get lined with this clay, which is non-porous and which will prevent the river from, I mean, which will degrade the river. And you've taken that and basically made it work for you for these ponds.
Yes, yes. Although I have
He's
not done
hoping
any of
that
that.
it will work. Yeah, right.
Yeah. So it's just putting the pieces of the puzzle together. So there are different conversations going on with people who are studying the properties of the clay. And there is the permaculturist who's saying that, okay, we can use it. So um, uh, this is just putting the puzzle together and checking if it works, like if those two pieces fit each other. That's what we're trying to do.
Can you tell me one more thing is that you will have to wet the clay, right? Right now, the clay that we've given you must be completely dry, right?
Now it's not because we have soaked and made it into like a paste already.
You have,
So we
okay.
have it, yeah, it's stored on the site in the paste format. Like it's kept under water, like there's a layer of water on top, which we keep maintaining. We don't let it dry. So that when the pond is ready, and now it is, like it wasn't all this time. So now we can put some straw in it in the same paste and start applying it in the pond.
So, I mean, random question, but I'm just curious because when we collect the clay, it's wet, you know.
Yes.
So we are collecting like several tons of clay, and it all comes to us wet, and then it dries, and then it has to be wet again. So, is there any possibility that one could, like, say, if there were sites that were ready to receive that one could just collect the wet clay and in that form itself simply put it onto a site that's ready and then not have to wet it all over again, because that would also save us some water.
Yeah, so the tricky point here is that Ganesh Visarjan happens when it's already monsoon, like end of the monsoon. So most of the places that have a setting like this pond will have water in them. So it will be very difficult to apply the clay. So the timeline of the Visarjan and the timeline when we can apply the clay, which is now, is kind of staggered at the moment. Unless somebody has a pond that is completely drained even in September, then maybe it can be done. But I think it will be very difficult to have completely drained pond in September.
I agree. The other question I have is that when this material, when it dries out and it lets go of the water content, it becomes fairly brittle, right? So I'm just thinking of your pond, and if it is lined with this material, and then during the summer, if there's no water in your pond, and the entire material becomes dry and brittle, then the possibility of it getting washed away with the next rains is quite likely, right?
Yeah, so that is one concern I do have. But then the way pondliner is supposed to work is that it's supposed to just percolate through the crevices of the pond and stay there, not on the surface. So
So it's
I'm
really about how
hoping,
you hold it in place. Like,
so the clay, the straw should hold it in place for the first season, and then I'm hoping that it will all get absorbed and like clog these crevices that you see in between the stones in that picture. So all of that I'm hoping will get filled with clay, and then even if the surface gets washed out, I don't think that should be a problem, because All we want is the clay in the
Inside.
crevices, in the gaps.
Great. Very exciting, Anujna. And I'm hoping that we can do a sequel to this discussion and see actually what happens when you try this out. I know that it takes a lot of energy and effort to convince your clients to experiment like this. So thank you for agreeing to do this. We're all going to learn a lot from this process. So thank you for taking us along the ride.